Working as an FBI special agent was my dream job. My whistleblowing was apolitical and in the spirit of upholding my oath. Nonetheless, the FBI cynically elected to close ranks and attack the messenger.
The FBI will crush you. This government will crush you and your family if you try to expose the truth about things that they are doing that are wrong. We are all examples of that.
Joining us now are Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle. Thanks for joining us, fellas.
FBI whistleblowers Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle both join us now. Gentlemen, so glad to have you on the program. Thank you for your testimony.
We need more folks like you, and I'm sure more people are going to be from your background are going to be giving you guys more intel as you're sharing that with the rest of us. We can kind of see that this is becoming normal for them to be held accountable, because I think especially an institution that we pay their salaries, they need to be held accountable.
I think a lot of people do share our beliefs and convictions. I think they just aren't at the point that Steve and I and others have gotten to. They're too afraid.
Thank you so much for being a guest here on PBD Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
How big is that bloody flag that Steve's got? It's the stone wall of his house. Lots of love, guys. Thanks very much for joining us.
Steve Friend, Garrett O'Boyle, thank you for being with us this morning. More importantly, thank you for speaking out. We appreciate it.
You're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast, and welcome to it, coming to you live on rumble.com/AmRadPod. We come to you every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 10:30 Eastern time, guys. Make sure you give us a thumbs up. Follow the channel here on Rumble. You want to subscribe, we would really appreciate it. You also want to subscribe to iTunes and Spotify and iHeart, the audio format, which we will drop there after we get done recording the show. And also you can check us out on @XAmericaNews, and we're standing up the YouTube channel. It's a process. Eventually, I think we're going to get there. We can maybe do something live, but as of right now, we're putting the recordings up there for people to find, because we're trying to radicalize more Americans across every single platform. And let's get to it today, more radicalization, because we're talking about pride before the fall, which is the worst of the deadly sins, that is pride. We're not going to limit it to the LGBTQAI plus kamikaze madness, but it is going to be a heavy portion of what we talk about today, because it is June. It is a Pride Month. It was announced. So Pride funding is drying up. Is this a sign that maybe we're going in the right direction? Or is it maybe a tactical retreat? We have woke parents who are announcing very publicly that they are leaving the United States to support their tranny children, who I'm sure they gleefully cut off the genitals of so they could impress their friends. The problem is, if they leave the country, they're going to have to have a whole new set of friends to impress. The Department of Justice, DOJ, is still all in for the LGBT. Joe Biden, very prideful human being, the hubris attached to him, he says he can beat the hell out of Jake Tapper. We've got a nice clip for that. Media, very prideful about illegal aliens, unable to actually connect the dots as to the fentanyl problem that we have in this country. Sanctuary cities, they're suffering from pride as well, and they might be going in the way of the dodo bird in Washington, D.C. And then we want to get into some data collection, maybe a little bit of too much pride in big tech. So we're going to get to all of that. Like I said, guys, it's a big show today. We had a lot of news come in over the weekend. And in order to do that, we're going to have to get Garrett O'Boyle on the horn with me today at GOB Actual, my co-host. Hope it was a good weekend for you. I know we're going into Pride Month. We dubbed it Life Month last year. I think we should probably stick with that. This is, after all, the 3rd year anniversary of the Dobbs decision.
Yeah, Life Month it is, Steve, because the truth matters. And the murderous, satanic government as God cultists, they're going to lose in the end.
If you've read the last page, you kind of know that's going to happen. But we still, we got to wave the foam fingers, and we got to make sure that we're in the fight here. And let's start the process out. We're going to go heavy into the LGBTQ rainbow kamikaze stuff today, because it is the first show that we've had during this Life Month, and we got to push back on those demons. And let's start with The Guardian. which is saying that there's actually some success from our standpoint here. I don't think it's necessarily as rosy as they're not saying it's rosy. They're saying it's a bad thing. But if you read it from our perspective, you might think this is actually a good thing. It is good. I don't think it's great, but maybe not let good be the enemy of perfect. Scared advertisers, flag bans, and Trump. The U.S. is in for a troubled Pride 2025. And they go to Utah to begin because on May 7th, a few weeks back, they became the first state to explicitly prohibit the flying of the pride flags at government buildings and schools. Similar Pride Month flag bans have been signed into law in Idaho and Montana, and there are 31 flag-related bills that have been introduced across 17 states. Now, they also go into the financial aspects because there's all these private corporations, big corporations, who have ponied up and contributed mightily to these pride parades and events around the country for years on end. But now the big funding might be drying up to a certain extent because San Francisco, which is really up there with the land of 1,000 genders in Minnesota, they're vying for which is the gayest city. San Francisco Pride had a loss of $200,000 of financing. Utah, $400,000 shortfall, and New York, $750,000, which represents a quarter of their corporate donors who have backed out of what's going on there. Now, Garrett, before we continue on, is this progress for our side? Or is this a tactical retreat for the other? Or is this an acknowledgement that the other side, they've already won and they just don't need to spike the football? They're up already several touchdowns. So at a certain point, you don't need to do a touchdown dance and rub it in their face.
I think I lean towards tactical retreat. This, as you're going through that, that's the argument I was having in my head. Have they given up? Have they ceded and realized, oh, people don't want this? Or, as Satanists often do, are they just kind of taking a step back to lurk in the shadows a little bit and not come at you fully with the pitchfork and pointy tail and flames, but they're gonna just say, okay, all right, we're gonna just ease off of this a little, and then we'll pounce again when we can, or when the political winds shift again, or because like I think of places like Bud Light, like Target, and especially over the last few years, the different type of pride campaigns essentially is what it comes down to that they were pushing, and it was all up in your face, but then it kind of hit them in the pocketbook. And so I think they're playing the long game here more than anything, and they know that on Earth, even in America, they're likely going to win this battle in the long run. But of course, I mean, that's the way it always goes. All you got to do is go back to the book of Genesis, Steve, and look at the tale of Sodom and Gomorrah to know that nations, when they start to decay, sexual perversion is a big piece of that.
So back to Guardian, which is just the news here, no editorializing, where they talk about the Patriot Front coming up the Coeur d'Alene, Idaho event in 2022 as being a notable security scare. But we'll just leave that alone. And they cite this figure, which boggled my mind. Quote, it's unknown if worsening perceptions of America will tangibly dent its share of the LGBTQ plus tourism market, currently estimated at around $300 billion. Tell me again that this is not an industry. This is an ideology. This is core to their beliefs. There's definitely no marketing that's going on here. There's nobody lining their pockets here at the expense of people cutting off their genitals. And I share your sentiment too, with the fact that I think this is a tactical retreat. The fight never is going to end for them. They're called progressives. They're always progressing towards something. So they cite here Salt Lake City and Boise. They're part of Utah. They're part of Idaho, where they're passing these flag bans, right? But the cities themselves are changing their city flags to bring up the pride flag. So they're doing the workarounds for it.
What about separation of church and state, Steve?
Well, this is why we can never have a secular nation. Right? Something will always be worshipped. Yeah. And they have used our values against us, as they're doing right now. As they're doing this tactical retreat, they're going to say, well, look, we have a First Amendment right. We can assemble. We can speak. We can identify however we want in this country. Are you going to deprive us of that opportunity? Meanwhile, they're hoping to do the Men in Black red laser to your eyes so you forget the fact that for the last several years, they said if you didn't just say, oh, it's okay, you do you. You actually had to celebrate. No, actually, you had to participate. No, actually, you had to get your kids involved in this. Then you need to be canceled or punished in some regard. And they don't have faith that people are going to hold the line on this at all, because if they're going to have a tactical retreat, it's up to us to seize that ground. We can't just
Yeah.
stay here. We have to be energetic. So the 10 commandments go back up on the courthouses, right?
Yeah.
From my
Bring it.
perspective, it
Right.
has to happen. And look, we're magnanimous. You can assemble, but it's your fault that you put the L and the G with the T. And the T is telling people that they should cut off their body parts, which to me is bad for their health and well-being. It would be no different than, especially if you're going after kids, saying like, let's toss the kids into the fire so we can have a great harvest.
Yes.
So
Just offer them up.
the moment I see a T or a kid invited to it, we're going to have a nice trap, because the parents that brought the kid there, they're going to jail from my perspective. And again, to even prove this further, that they are not uh, completely withdrawing from the fight. They have no confidence that we're going to take that ground. I can go to it's a great example that I found over the weekend when there were lots of them out there, as much as it was muted. What is the greatest symbol of masculinity in America other than professional football? Tampa Bay Buccaneers, proud to support Pride Month. Who in the Rainbow Kamikaze Mafia is this really important to that the Bucks celebrate it?
Right. I can't think of even one person, but like with all cults, you have to bend the knee or you're going to be the next sacrifice. And to me, again, we mentioned Bud Light, Target. Here, this year, you got the Buccaneers rolling this out. Why? Haven't they learned that it's actually a net negative for their bottom line right now?
I
But they
don't think
don't
it
care.
is. I don't think it
Okay.
is. Because I mean, you talk about the 300 billion tourism industry that's attached to it, and you just got to go a couple derivatives, right? Like the Bud Lights and stuff are they're it's cosplay, and they're posing as if, well, we're based now. We send our beer, our piss water over to the UFC, so we're tough, right? So you should buy our stuff again. Let's just go a couple derivatives away from that. So the corporate sponsors that are involved with the NFL, which is all about just the NFL, do not take a stand on anything. Like Harrison Butker was probably the bravest human being last year for doing what he did. But
How
the
dare he?
NFL, which fines players if they don't pull their socks up high enough, because everyone has to look the same. We're uniform. We're just very corporate. They are going to allow the teams to branch out and go into these political issues, because the corporate sponsors, um, they're saying, look, you're going to have to do it because we can't. Meanwhile, you have State Street and BlackRock that are saying, no, you're still going to do it. We're just going to go one skip beyond you so we can continue to hold the line here and implement our communist ideology, our depraved ideology via another mechanism. So you won't necessarily have the piss water advertising. It will just go straight to the field, right?
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that they don't think we're going to hold the line on this. I think you're right about that because for whatever reason, people have failed to realize that the fight doesn't ever end. You have to continue the fight. It's like during elections. I think I talked about it this spring when we had a special election here, and we usually take the girls with us because it's part of our methodology for raising them and teaching them. And one of my older two, she or my second oldest, she was like, I don't want to go. It's boring. And so I seized on the opportunity, and she's not wrong. It is boring.
Citizenship is boring at times. Yes.
Right. And I said, and I think she even said something like, I thought Trump won. And I was like, yes. And so I took this like, all right, time for a civics lesson, even for a 7-year-old, and explained how your civic duty doesn't ever stop. Just because the person you voted for won in one election doesn't mean they're going to win in the next, or doesn't mean that there are other positions that need to be filled to help bolster your underlying ideology that you want for your government. So just because at the big one, the presidential election, the guy you wanted won, that doesn't mean you get to just throw in the towel now, because it is ongoing. And that's the same here. You mentioned BlackRock and some of these other places. Of course, they're going to keep pushing. They've got the money. They don't care if they lose a little bit, because in the long run, they're going to just keep pushing their agenda, knowing that people are going to lose interest, or think they won, or think that they've turned back the scales on the LGBTQ madness, when in fact it's just kind of creeping around the corner again.
Your daughter's perspective is basically like, I would believe, a majority of voters in the country
Mhm.
who are old enough to vote, where they're saying like, well, I just show up every 4 years to go pull a lever for whatever candidate I think is somebody I can drink a beer with, drink some piss water with.
Yeah.
And we're talking about, keeping up the fight. Let's talk about people who are allegedly giving up the fight, but might have some first world problems. Reporting from NBC News, because we do lots of virtue signaling on the communist media in the country. These families say they're leaving the US because of its anti transgender climate. And they went to Denver. Denver parents
Okay.
Brandon and Candace, which are pseudonyms because they want to protect their anonymity. But if you read the article, you see them photographed throughout, because at its core, the virtue signaling means that they're prideful and they want it to be all about them. But Brandon and Candace spending tens of thousands of dollars to move to New Zealand next month. The reason is to protect their 9-year-old transgender daughter, Chase, who's
Protect. Oh, Steve. I mean, right there, just with the language, as we often talk about, to protect. You already failed at that. You already failed protecting. What was it? Was it a he or a she when they were born?
well, it's
Because
a transgender daughter, Chase, I guess, who hasn't changed his name. So Chase, they say, is a dude who feels pretty and is feeling the effects of the Trump administration's policies, increasingly hostile climate for trans people. They are one of 5 families interviewed by NBC News who probably scoured the country to
Mhm.
find a single digit number of families who are going to engage in this activity, and also have the wealth because they live in the greatest GD country on earth, in order to virtue signal to a massive news agency about what they're doing to #resist, right? So these 1 in 5 families interviewed have either already left or plan to leave the country as a result of federal and state policies targeting trannies. That's my editorializing. They say transgender people. Asked if in interview with her parents whether she is aware of Trump's policies. Now, again, Chase, little boy, is 9 years old. You just referenced your daughter, Garrett. At 9 years old, this boy, they asked, are you aware of the president's policies regarding health care for people who want to cut off their genitals? Chase, who's in the 4th grade, said, quote, I am very aware of what he has been doing to people like me and how I feel about it. I hate it because I think everybody deserves to have that care. This is
Jeez.
such bad abuse. This is why I say we don't give up the fight. We put the trap out when the parents show up to the tranny parade. We take the kid away. We put the parents in the slammer.
Mhm.
No question about it. This
No.
kid, they have destroyed him for the rest
Right.
of his life. His rest of his probably most likely very short life,
Mhm.
because he will try to kill himself.
Right. And a 9-year-old, you don't have this knowledge, this information, unless it's getting fed to you. Most likely from Candace and Brandon, your pseudonymed parents. Steve, have you ever, with your sons, have you ever run into one of these people in the wild, like one of these tranny weirdos or LGBTQ lunatics? It's happened to us very rarely, where you see them at the grocery store or whatever. And my daughters, they can't stop staring. And then we're like, hey, stop. Like, yes, we know they're a freak, and pray for their soul. We've got problems too and are sinful, but clearly that person is way off the rails and needs to repent and turn to Christ. And then in the van, it's, why'd that guy look like a girl, or whatever the case may have been. And then you got to try to start to explain that, and it's rooted with answers in Genesis, where God made us in his image, and male and female he made us. And then you try to explain, but even with our perspective and our outlook, and clearly even little kids, because they have some lived experience, and by and large, they see men and women who look like men and women. And then when they run into one of these weirdos, they're like, what the heck's going on there? Because innately, they have knowledge of and an understanding of the created order of things, even in a fallen world. And so they can't stop looking, and they're like, what the heck's going on with that guy?
The cognitive dissonance they're unable to mask on their face because of their maturity level. So we had the exact a similar experience. I've seen children like Chase doing jujitsu with parents that were very excited to make their boys into girls, and had my son come out and say, and was having problems with the pronouns. He is doing this, but
Right.
says he's a girl. And this is the emperor has no clothes. The
Mhm.
child has the ability to cut through all the BS uh, PC culture that's been fed and jammed down our throat for years on end. So we don't want to offend anybody. We want to hurt anybody's feelings. The kids are like, that's a dude. I don't know what all these big people around me are saying here. And that's why they go after the kids, because they have to beat that into them as quickly as possible so they can completely eliminate anybody who's willing to hashtag resist the madness. I mean, my son had my full permission and endorsement to take that boy down to the ground as hard as possible. I said, we'll beat that out of him. Don't worry about it, son. I want to finish up this story here from NBC News about these families saying that they're leaving the United States because it's such a mean and awful place that it's allowed them to earn thousands of dollars so they can virtue signal NBC News anonymously, meanwhile putting their photos in there because it's all about them. They're estimating it's going to cost them between $65,000 and $80,000, and they chose New Zealand because they visited it a few years ago. You know, they holidayed in New Zealand. This is very affluent family.
Yeah.
It's very LGBTQ friendly there, so they're going to make that move. It's also worth noting and connecting to the fact that it is not limited to the rainbow kamikaze madness. Here's a mention here. It's not only trans minors and their parents who are making the move. Ohio couple Marina and Faye, who are both trans, requested only their first names be used because they didn't want to be publicly targeted. I don't know why. They're leaving the United States, so I don't know why they would care about being publicly targeted.
Yeah.
But they said that the turning point for them was the Trump administration's detaining and trying to deport people with valid visas, and revoking visas of foreign-born college students. So the trannies are going to have the same thing the communists do. They're going to have the coalesce the malcontents. We're either going to be cutting off our genitals, or we're going to be rallying in the street for the illegals who are going to throw incendiary devices into crowds. They don't make sense. They should not align together, but they're just malcontents, and they're going to hashtag resist however they can possible. And it's really, I think, derivative of hubris and pride that they could never imagine for a minute that they might have made a giant mistake when they cut off their penis.
No, never. They clearly I was born in the wrong body, and they don't even entertain the idea of being made, of being created in God's likeness, in his image intentionally. And so they want to sacrifice that to the false god as soon as their mind gets twisted and warped. And I don't know why, but Chesty Puller popped into my mind when you were talking about Tina and Faye, or that's not what it was. Now I'm
Tina
thinking
Fey
Sarah.
was the SNL actress, but okay.
But so you got a dude who thinks he's a girl and a girl who thinks he's a dude, who now they're in a relationship, and they're also going to flee the country. And it just makes me think about holding the line. And really, like Chesty Puller said, it's a target rich environment because we're surrounded on all sides. I'm paraphrasing his actual quote, but that's what it is. I mean, pick your battle, pick which front of the war you want to engage in the most, because you got a lot of options to choose from.
Look, I'm trying to aspire to not be a prideful person. And I did some contemplating on this, Garrett, and I realized that for a time, I was a man trapped in a woman's body. It was about 9 months, and then I was born. All
There you
right,
go.
let's acknowledge the show sponsor today before we continue on with Pride Before the Fall, and that's Jace Medical, the new sponsor for the program today, guys. You can go to jace.com. That's JASE.com. And when you go there, use the promo code AMRAD, AMRAD, to get some money off these. And look, this is the future of medicine from our perspective here. It's good to be prepared. You don't know what supply chains are going to hold for you there. They offer things like antibiotics. Look, recently I woke up and I started having the cold, and my colds always develop into some sort of like sinus infection or respiratory infection. And we do in the family what everybody does, what the doctors tell you not to do. And that is we take the antibiotic for a couple of days and then we save it because we don't want to have to go back to the doctor, because for whatever reason in this country, we have these guilds that we have to go to and pay so that we can get medicine when we could just get it off the shelf like amoxicillin, because I'm almost 40 and I'm a man and I could diagnose that. So fortunately, the wife had a few extra pills, like 3 days worth, which was just enough to get me over the hump. But now I get the Jace Medical, I got the Jace case, and I have an adequate supply of amoxicillin sitting around. And if I run out of that for like $20, I can refill it. So excited to bring them on. Go to jace.com and the promo code is AmRad. Get yourself a little bit of savings there. Let's continue on with the madness, with the Pride madness. And before we run out the clock on the LGBTQ, we would be bereft in our duty as podcast hosts if we didn't bring up the Department of Justice, which I thought we were based now, Garrett. I thought that the DEI was gone, but the DOJ is still having a little bit of problems with the press releases, which I love to read. New Orleans woman guilty of CARES Act fraud. Now, our New Orleans woman is named Brandon. According to the charging documents, Brandon, aka Brandy, and it goes into how he got this big giant fraud. At sentencing, he's going to face 5 years in prison for false statements. And she, according to the DOJ, faces up to 10 years in prison for theft of government funds. Now, in response to comment, the Blaze reached out because this Shane Jones, public information officer at the United States Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Louisiana, said that they had corrected the press release that describes Jarrow as a New Orleans resident now, but woman and she are still within the press release.
So you've got Brandon, who wants to call himself Brandy, who's facing 5 years for false statements. So for me, the logical question is, who at the DOJ is going to be facing 5 years for false statements? Because they inserted false statements here, calling Brandon a she.
Well, at the very least, they should lose their job, but that not going to happen. But what you do lose your job for is apparently if you read your Bible and you believe in that guy Jesus. Reporting from the New York Times, which was one time a newspaper, pro-Trump Kennedy Center executive says he was fired. His name is Floyd Brown, longtime, as the New York Times describes him, a longtime right-wing activist, said on Thursday he had been fired from the Kennedy Center because of his views on same-sex marriage. Brown claimed that he was told he would be fired if he did not publicly recant his position on traditional marriage. Quote from Brown says, "Needless to say, I refused to recant, and I was shown the door. Comments rooted in my personal Christian views, which I have made in the past, have no impact upon my work here at Kennedy Center, nor do they impinge on my interactions with colleagues. I have never intended to attack or demean any person in my statements, and have always shared the mission of Jesus, striving to love others unconditionally," unquote. But put him out on his butt, because we're based now. We're definitely not allowing the camel nose back under the tent in the cover of darkness.
I like how this alleged news piece says his views on traditional marriage.
Good point.
It's not his view. It's God's view on traditional marriage. And this is what the culture gets wrong so frequently when they love to attack Christians. My flesh tells me that I want to eat whatever I want, whenever I want. I want to stay up late. I want to drink. I want to have sex with a bunch of women. I don't want to get married. Our flesh tells us these things because we are fallen by nature. So when the Bible tells you truth that is contrary to what your flesh desires, and then you try to live in accordance with that truth, one, you're going to fail time and time again because we're fallen, sinful humans, which is why we needed Jesus Christ to come and die on that cross. But then when we speak the truth, and I'm talking God's truth here, it's not my opinion on traditional marriage. It's not his opinion on traditional marriage. It's God's. It's God's command on what it is. But oh no, he can't be in government now because his boss is gay, and so he's got to be fired. And this just goes back to what we've been talking about a bit about how holding the line, continuing the fight doesn't ever end.
And I will never accept anybody in Washington, D.C.'s word for it. I mean, this guy, Floyd Brown, might be a piece of dirt, of garbage, right? Who just did something corrupt and they fired him, and now he's going to throw that out there to try to save his hide publicly. I don't know. I don't know his background or anything like that. But the reporting from the New York Times, this is 100% believable. This would happen
Oh, for
in the
sure.
era that we're in right now. And
No
which is
doubt.
sort of the point that I wanted to bring out of it, because this where we are. That's where we're at, because they're doing a tactical retreat, but wherever they can, they're going to find ways to work that back in, right? And we can pivot away from the rainbow kamikaze, but we're going to stay on the subject of pride. I got a couple of different pieces today from Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness. This one about
what's their new hashtag? A news outlet or something like that. It's like, no,
allegedly.
you're still not.
Jeff Bezos's rag. All right. This is about Muriel Bowser, who's the mayor of Washington, D.C., a sanctuary city which put the giant BLM Plaza. They painted that over. But Bowser has a budget proposal that's going to scale back health care for immigrants and others. Well, immigrants means illegal aliens. And I don't want to really get into the healthcare funding aspect of it, because that's boring, and I don't care about Washington, D.C. For all I care, it should just go into the Potomac at this point. But it is worth going into a little bit of the status of America's capital and how they've run it into the ground because of their own pride. So Washington, D.C.'s chief financial officer predicted the city could endure a more than $1 billion revenue downturn in the next 4 years because of Trump.
Yeah, it's all Trump's fault.
Because they're shrinking the government. So they're going to lose 40,000 jobs, as a result of those efforts. And in reality, say that it necessitates more fiscal discipline. She sounds like a darn Republican now. So that House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform advanced a District of Columbia Federal Immigration Compliance Act. All right, that's a lot of government speak, but basically the Congress has say in the city of Washington, D.C. This is this weird existence they have because it's a federal city. So Congress actually enacts things specific to Washington, D.C. So they advanced this committee, this act, or to rein in immigrant, as they're labeling it, but illegal alien in sanctuary city status. So it requires the city to comply with federal immigration laws, including detainers of individuals. Now, Washington, D.C. currently limits how much its local authorities collaborate with federal immigration enforcement. They basically say, go to hell, ICE. We're not going to help you. But the new budget proposal from Mayor Muriel Bowser repeals that policy and starts allowing local law enforcement to provide federal immigration agencies with information and access to the jails so they can go scoop up those illegal aliens.
Yeah, like we used to do in this nation. That used to be commonplace, as far as I'm aware, in every municipality, every local or state level law enforcement entity. That's what you did. If you came across an illegal, you contacted the federal government, and then they liaised with you to deport them or start that process or whatever. And so it's very similar to this overall pride agenda, right? Like we think it's being rolled back a little bit, but it's just a temporary tactical retreat. And I can't hold my breath on how long something like this is going to last. Probably only as long as Trump is in office, maybe even less than that. And because if the Republicans lose in the midterms, well, Trump's going to be impeached like the next day. So rules like this will change again.
It can't be the same thing as always seen throughout my entire life, where the communists take 3 steps to the left and then the Republicans win in some way and they take 1 step back to the right and they say, look at all the progress we made. And I look at the overall picture and say, we're still 2 steps to the left. You have to take back all the ground and then push the paradigm entirely, which is why we need to have 10 commandments back up on the courthouses. All right. And on pride and on the media's pride, let's connect this with illegal aliens and immigration, which is parenthetically connected to a weapon of mass destruction, I would contend, and that's fentanyl. So Washington Post, again, that democracy is dying in darkness here, or at least because they're so dumb they can't, or they pretend to be dumb, they cannot connect the dots here. Why are fentanyl seizures dropping? After years of confiscating rising amounts of fentanyl, the opioid that has fueled the most lethal drug epidemic in American history, U.S. officials are confronting a new and puzzling reality at the border. Fentanyl seizures are plummeting. U.S. seizures at the Mexican border are down almost 30% for the first half of the fiscal year compared to the same period last year. They shrunk even more since the first half of 2023. Now, the Washington Post is just pondering here what could possibly be the reason that the seizures at the border are occurring.
What could have done it, Steve?
I mean, it's like I believe it was a New York Times article that argued that there are all these guys in prison where have heightened incarceration rates, and yet crime rates are going down. So that doesn't make sense. Could it be because you put the criminals in jail?
Yeah.
All right. U.S. seizures are down. One explanation is for the decline is that the war within the Sinaloa cartel. Okay, possibly. DEA's annual threat report says that there are signs that many Mexico-based fentanyl cooks are having a difficulty obtaining some of the chemicals.
Oh, I wonder why.
Maybe the tariffs are doing it.
Yeah.
The decline is occurring even as the Trump administration has deployed thousands of troops to the border and expanded drone flights. Why is this happening? Could it be because of the thousands of troops at the border and the drone flights, and the Sinaloa cartel is in the money-making business, and they're not going to send shipments of fentanyl that are guaranteed to be seized?
Yes. So
But I'm not a journalist.
Really, this is drug dealing 101 here. If you look at the global war on drugs, which we lost, this is a similar pattern. Methods and methodology needs to change over time because law enforcement adjusts their tactics. And so now the drug dealers and cartels need to adjust theirs. And then you have some of these external pressures, like some sort of turf war or tariffs or a combination of these things where they're just adjusting. It's going to be a momentary lapse. And maybe even as long as Trump is in office, maybe it'll lapse for a number of years, but this isn't some perpetual dent in the drug trade, because the cartels continually will figure out a new way.
Well, I mean, I could sum it up really back to being a patrol officer. You have the dope house, and I knew that if I parked my patrol unit nearby, they would not sell drugs while I was there.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as I peeled away, they would go back to selling drugs, but I could impact them for that amount of time that I was there. This is no different. You're setting the drones up, you putting the personnel there. Now, if I was able to park my car there 24 hours a day, every day of the year, they were going to have to adapt and survive in a different way, which I think if you take a step back and looking at the macro here, that's exactly what's going on with the fentanyl distribution. And I agree with you. I think the war on drugs is probably just spitting into the wind. I don't know if we're going to have success with it, but then again, we do have to seal up the southern border for that reason and other reasons. And if that results in fewer fentanyl deaths, objectively good thing. And the Washington Post can't bring themselves to acknowledge that what it is. They have triple digit IQs. Right? I mean, I know that they they'd rather think that you think that they're dumb than say that things are communist are not a good thing, but that's their pride speaking. But the media and politicians, they like to work together on these sorts of things. So I want to pivot over to a very prideful politician who the media covered for the last 4 years, and that's the human Roomba, Joe Biden, who is taking quite a bit of umbrage with the fact that his senility has been called out lately. And we've got a couple pieces connected to this because I do think it's worth a discussion. But Joe Biden, who for years has said he would take you behind the gym and beat the heck out of you, he's now threatening call to violence. Jake Tapper, where's the FBI on this one?
And there's also been a lot of discussion recently about your mental and physical capabilities while you were in office.
You can see that. I'm mentally incompetent and I can't walk and I can beat the hell out of both of them.
Do you want to reply to any of those reports, and also to the fact that there are some Democrats who are now questioning whether you should have run for re-election in the first place?
Why didn't they run against me then? What? Because I'd have beaten them.
Do you have any regrets?
No, I don't.
Dude.
The pride. He's just a jerk.
He is a jerk. Always has been. And that continues to show through even with the senility and marble mouth. The guy's not even able to speak. Still, he's incoherently answering the questions. Even as you do make out what he's trying to say, it's like, that doesn't even make sense. But I'm going to beat the hell out of him. Okay, Joe. I mean, I could push him over with my index finger. He's so fragile.
And the big J journalist asking him a very tough question. Yeah. She's got access to the president. I presume that she works that beat. Never wrote that story before now, right? No. It's just convenient now. It's that they're going to trot that out there, and they're doing it for a bunch of reasons. They're doing it for commercial reasons. I mean, Jake Tapper, we'll get to in a second. He wants to sell a book. He wants to buy back some of his credibility on this one. But ultimately, they just want to set the narrative so they can say, we can never allow this to happen again. And you know who's not being forthcoming with their medical records? The evil orange, literally Hitler in the White House. This is what we'll go back to. But before we do, I have another video clip. We're talking about pride. This is like a generational pride thing. It's a they're on my team pride thing. Let's talk about, or at least show, Bill Clinton, former president of the United States. He's stepping up for old Joe. He's telling everybody that no, he couldn't possibly have seen anything wrong.
These old white guys got to stick together.
That's it.
Speaking of aging, there's this book that came out that talks about Joe Biden and the people around him seeing that he had cognitive and physical decline. Did you ever have a moment with him where you thought maybe he was unfit to run for president? No.
I thought he was a good president. The only concern I thought he had to deal with was, could anybody do that job until they were 86? And we'd had several long talks. I had never seen him and walked away thinking he can't do this anymore. He was always on top of his brief.
Sure.
You never saw any cognitive decline?
So I didn't know anything about any of this, and I haven't read the book. I saw President Biden not very long ago, and I thought he was in good shape. But the book didn't register with me because I never saw him that way.
Why didn't you read the book?
I didn't want to, because he's not president anymore, and I think he did a good job, and I think we are facing challenges today without precedent in our history.
Garrett, the book didn't register with him, even though he didn't read it. So, but if you notice there, and for those who are watching us here on rumble.com/AmRadPod, I could not get over the slack-jawed nature that Bill Clinton is staring at the blonde journalist in front of him, and I know what he's thinking the entire time. And when he actually has to use his mental faculties to provide an answer, which Joe Biden couldn't do, but Bill Clinton still has enough just rattling around in that brain at this point, he had to look away because he can't hold two thoughts in his head.
Yeah, he's not telling the truth. So he's looking down and to the side because he knows he's not telling the truth, and possibly helping cloud his perspective is his own decline. I mean, clearly Bill Clinton is rapidly declining as well. That's evident in that clip. I don't know the last time I heard him speak, maybe 6 months ago. It's drastically different since then.
He's 78. So, I mean, not buying green bananas. But still, I think you alluded to the desires of the flesh. There's no question that that's what he was thinking while she was asking him the question. And he's like, all right, need to refocus.
I gotta snap out of it for a moment.
It's like having a TV on in the background when your wife's talking to you. You can't do it. Just turn the TV off, right? That's what's going on there. And you alluded to the pride in the media and this sort of op they're doing. I did take a lot of pleasure in seeing this headline about Jake Tapper and his ratings and his book. Jake Tapper's CNN ratings dropped 25%.
Everything's
his book,
plummeting,
Original Sin, is bombing, which is just awesome. Original Sin sold 53,737 print units in its first week. reached #1 spot on the New York Times, though this figure is significantly lower than other comparable political books, despite extensive promotion. The Lead with Jake Tapper, where basically CNN is the hype machine for this book, and Jake Tapper entirely. He's on all the time. The Lead with Jake Tapper averaged 500,000 total viewers from April through May. It's a 25% decline despite all the hype that's going on, and that's from the show's lowest ratings since 2015.
Good.
I'll play a just sad song on the world's smallest violin for Jake Tapper.
Thanks, Jake. Enjoy your decline in viewership and readership and your grip on the fake news media.
All right, pride in big tech and also concerns about privacy. And I want to bring this up and talk to you about it. You and I were talking before we launched today about this, because I think it brings up some concerns, but are they warranted or not? And also just smacking ourselves in the head for not having invested in Palantir. But reporting from the New Republic, not a right-wing source, guys. Read it so you didn't have to. Trump taps Palantir to create a master database
Oh,
of
great.
every American. President Trump has enlisted Palantir, founded by far-right billionaire Peter Thiel, also gay, to carry out his March executive order instructing government agencies to share data with each other. So we're trying to have cooperation between the various agencies. Now, the order increased fears the government is putting together a database to wield surveillance powers over the American public. Palantir has already taken in $113 million in government spending since the Trump administration began.
Thanks, taxpayers.
That came from DOD and Homeland Security. The number is expected to grow because there's now over 700 million contracts more from DOD coming in.
Dang.
Palantir is speaking with the Social Security Administration and the IRS about buying its technology. The tool they're talking about is called Foundry, which analyzes and organizes data, is already being used in Homeland Security, Department of Health and Human Services, and at least 2 other agencies, allowing the White House to compile data from different places. Now, is this just aggregating and organizing information that they already have over us, or is this a potential tool that can be weaponized?
I think the latter. I mean, potentially it'll start with just gathering data that these various agencies already have and then putting it in one place. But as governments always do, they just delve more and more towards tyranny. And a company like Palantir, who's getting this is I believe a great example of what we often say: funding your own demise. You're paying for it, and look, clearly it doesn't matter who's in office, a Republican or a Democrat. Really, it doesn't matter what letters behind your name. Government is going to government. We've already seen that in a lot of ways in just the last 135 days or so since Trump has been the president again. And this to me is just a giant step in the wrong direction, but that's what government does. Government exists to further increase government. And clearly it doesn't matter who's in charge. The deep state's going to deep state and going to gather more and more information about you that the government can then use against you, regardless of political affiliation.
This reminds me of a technological version of the task force, which on its face sounds like a really good thing. The law enforcement task force, the idea that sort of was born out of post September 11th, where we're going to pull in officers from multiple agencies that bring various degrees of subject matter expertise and focus, and then just areas of responsibility. So it might not just be, oh, the cop from this municipality and the deputy from this county that adjoin each other. They're going to work together to address problems that might be crossing the lines. It's different agencies. So we can get an IRS guy in the room with an ICE guy and an FBI guy, so that we can bring all this subject matter expertise in the room and figure out the best path forward to go get the bad guys. Let's go get those terrorists. And people think, oh, that makes sense. But what winds up happening is, the best example I can come up with is FBI and Homeland Security. Now, the FBI, which is completely out of whack, and day 102 of the Kash Patel administration there, no big changes on this regard that I can report. They still do have the AGG DOM, the Attorney General Guidelines for Domestic Investigations. and the DIOG, the Domestic Investigations and Operations Guide, which theoretically say we have a constitution, which gives us a certain latitude to conduct investigations. We're actually going to narrow it more using these guidelines so that we never steer outside of the Constitution. All right, they do, we know, but theoretically, that's what they do. But Homeland Security does not have the AGG DOM or the DIOG. So if I partner with a Homeland Security investigator on a task force, I could say, hey, look, my agency says I can't do those things. I know they're constitutional, but my agency says, hey, it's got to be within our policy. We're going to keep it really narrow. Can you just do that for me?
Yeah. You can
Right?
do that. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Hey, I can't, but you can.
All right. Well, one more, completely different, but still on the subject of pride. And this one was probably the most disturbing story of everything that we've talked about today, which is saying something. And I don't like to send this out on a dark note, but I do have a good palate cleanse. So I'll make up for it, guys. I promise. This comes from the Delaware General Assembly. Delaware, home state of the human Roomba.
Joe Biden.
Joe Biden. Guess what? By the way, Delaware is legalizing assisted suicide. Pride before the fall. State's House Bill 140 makes it legal for adults given 6 months or fewer to live, a prognosis that is not always accurate, to request deadly drugs from their physicians to kill themselves. Maybe Joe Biden will reach out to this because he lives there. But whatever you ask for in a free market, you will get more of. And now I'm sure we'll have commercials advocating for dying with dignity, right? Because of the pride that you're entitled to die with dignity. No, you're not. There is no death with dignity. But that's me maybe going pretty early into the biblical worldview. I know that's your lane, Garrett. Your
It's
thoughts.
our lane, Steve. It's everybody's lane. Of course. Basically, what we've been talking about today, whether it's Palantir and government tyranny, whether it's LGBTQ type of pride, or now this latest step in killing yourself, it all goes back to original sin, which it should be really no coincidence that Pride Month, to celebrate homosexuality and transgender badness and queer ideology and all this, of course they're going to label it pride. Of course they're going to hijack God's symbol that he was never going to flood the earth again, the rainbow. Of course they're going to hijack these things because original sin is pride. So of course they're going to stand on that mountain of sin and hold it up as their pinnacle of false truth. And then with this, the moral decline and decay of just kill yourself. So we can kill babies, or we have killed tens of millions of babies over the last number of decades. Now we're going to wade into new territory of just removing yourself from Earth, because why not?
I'm reminded of our trip when we went to Las Vegas. I think we talked about this before, but it's just worth bringing up, where you have unfettered capitalism / libertarianism. Like it's ungrounded without the moral sentiments, which is part 2 of economics. Like you have to have moral sentiments attached to it. Otherwise, whatever you ask for, you will get more of. And we're out in Las Vegas, right? And you have the prostitution walking around, and there's gambling all over the place, all the debauchery you could ever want. And then as you and I were walking and driving, couldn't help but notice that I did not see a city employee the entire time we were there. Nobody was fixing a pothole. Nobody was doing care of the medians of the plants and grass, and nothing, because it's completely privatized. And those are the casinos that want you to come in there and spend your money, and they're going to entice you. They're going to create a great product that looks very appealing to you. And if you have moral sentiments attached to that, like that's where it works. And to connect it to this, like you're going to have doctors who are out there having consultations with not just their patients, but the patients' families, like the Bill Clinton's families or the Joe Biden's families, and say, it might be in the best interest for you to just let this happen, get some power of attorney, and then I can do that for you. And I'm glad you came in here. Thanks for basically checking out my Facebook page where I advertise this, because there's no moral sentiment behind what I'm doing here today.
And they'll often even spin it in a way that the moral high ground is to kill yourself. look, you can pay me a certain fee that I'll get to help you through this process. But just think of what you're going to be able to leave behind for your family. You're not going to have the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in healthcare costs and living in an assisted home or all sorts of things to try to sell you the idea that this is actually better. And it's going to be better for those you're leaving behind too.
This is the mentality that these doctors have when they're cutting the genitals off the kids, which is why parents are fleeing the country, because there's going to be some sort of moral sentiment or a Hippocratic oath that says you do no harm to the patient, i.e. just cutting off healthy breast tissue or genitals or injecting them with hormones, whatever it is that is against what any sort of medical professional historically up till about 15 minutes ago would have said, of course, why would I do that? That's
Right.
against my ethics and my ethos entirely. All right. Let's talk about your ethos, Garrett. Why don't you bring that up for us today, and then we'll get to our palate cleanse.
Yes, sir. We're sticking with the 9th commandment, Steve. Exodus 20, verse 16, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And as we talk about pride, as we talk about truth, that's what this comes down to, is the truth. And a little bit more from this Coral Ridge sermon as well.
You know, I often get the question, Pastor, how do I know I'm saved? How do I know I'm born again? One of the marks of the Christian life is that you live according to the truth and that you abide in that truth. That's the case that John is making in chapter 2, that if you are a Christian, God does not quit on what he begins. He begun a good work in you, and he will finish a good work in you, and he gives us the truth of his word to sustain and to abide in him. Being a Christian is hard. Being a Christian involves suffering. If you're new to the Christian faith this morning, or maybe wrestling with what it means to be a Christian, don't buy the lie that living a Christian means easy living. Just ask the first century church. Often it requires more suffering and more sacrifice, but it's in the midst of suffering and sacrifice that we have truth found alone in his word that sustains us and empowers us and emboldens us to not bear false witness, but instead champion the truth of God's word. How is this so? Well, there are many motivations for bearing false witness, many motivations for not telling the truth. But can I give you the ultimate one? The ultimate reason and motivation for lying, it's failure to trust the gospel. In that moment, we find ourselves bearing false witness. It's failing to believe that Christ is enough. I need to embellish this story to make myself look good. I have to put down my neighbor for me to look impressive. I've got to twist the story. I've got to fear man instead of fearing God. It's all a casualty of failing to believe in that moment that who God says I am in Christ is enough. It's failing to be rooted and grounded in the good news that I am a beloved child of God, regardless of what the world may think, or regardless of what the world may say. And how is that possible, that Christ is enough? Well, it's because of the good news that 2,000 years ago, our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ was condemned falsely. You see, in his mock trial, which was a sham, he was falsely accused and falsely betrayed and falsely arrested and falsely condemned and falsely executed on a cross. But when Pilate asked him, "Are you who they say you are? And do you recant from bearing false witness and being a blasphemer to God?" You know what the scriptures say? At his sham trial, Jesus did not open his mouth. You know what that meant in a court of law? Guilty as charged. And you say, "Pastor, how could that be? How could Jesus be charged and convicted in such an unjust matter. That, my friends, is the gospel. That he stood as a man that was condemned so that you and I, by faith alone, would never be condemned. Yes, the good news of the gospel is this: our lies and our breaking of the 9th commandment condemned an innocent man. And by faith alone, the Father declares you and I not guilty.
And that is, to me, one of the most powerful pieces of the truth, or the most powerful piece of the truth, is what it comes down to, what he's talking about there, the gospel truth. The world is filled with lies. The Bible says that Satan is the father of lies. So government, the pride agenda, the pride month, all of these things that we can point at and say, this is anti-truth. Well, of course it is, because the world is rooted in anti-truth. This is why the world hates Christians. It's why, as he was talking about, is why Christ was condemned to death. And it's why we have to stand on that truth and continue to hold the line and not give up the truth for a momentary lapse of judgment, a momentary lapse of weakness or cowardice, but to remember that we don't deserve Christ's sacrifice, but he brought it and gave it to us anyways.
We also don't deserve some generosity here on the program that you guys continue to give us, and we just want to acknowledge that and say thank you we had some gifted subscriptions for the program from DL Maga. Gave some of you guys some access as subscribers to the American Radicals podcast today. Thank you very much, DL Maga, and thank you everybody for continuing to support the channel. Talked about some dark stuff today. Want to make sure we cheer everybody up because, like I said in the very beginning, you read the last page, you know it's going to work out okay. You also know it's going to work out okay because we have the right number and the right type of people in this country to help save us from what could go wrong, and that is rednecks.
United States of America, most powerful country on this planet. And it's not because we have more money or we're better looking. No. It's because we have something in this country they don't have in other countries. That's right. I'm talking about rednecks. Good old boys with an arsenal in their basement that have been waiting for just such an occasion since 1775. Oh, believe me, foreign troops land in the South, there'll be a line of pickup trucks and NASCARs heading down I-95. Marines will show up 3 hours later, nothing but beer cans and shotgun shells. What the hell happened here? War's over, baby! Hey.
I love it. That's great.
It is true, man. It is true. We do have an adequate supply here. I mean, maybe they all just live in Florida. I see them all the time, but I know we're in good hands with the rednecks. All right. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us today on the American Radicals podcast. Back with you Thursday, 10:30 Eastern time on rumble.com/AmRadPod. Also, check us out on @XAmericaNews and on the YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe there. And we will see you back here in 2 days. Until then, have a great day.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/AmRadPod.